This Voice of San Diego podcast is sponsored by Manolatus Nelson Murphy, Advertising and Public Relations. M&M brings decades of experience and their vast network to you. The firm develops insightful strategies and cost-effective tactics to help clients achieve their goals and connect to those who matter most. M&M specializes in media relations, community engagement, crisis communications, and cross-platform marketing. Learn more at mnmadpr.com.
Thanks for joining us on the Voice of San Diego podcast in partnership News Radio 600 Kogo. I am Scott Lewis, editor-in-chief at Voice. I'm joined by Sara Libby, our managing editor. Hello.
What's up?
Andrew Keats is working on some projects. Going to take a couple weeks off the show. How are you doing, Sara, in this PF era?
Well, why don't you talk about how you're doing? Because I actually had a pretty good week in sports fandom.
You did?
I did.
What
As I'm sure you know, it was the U.S. National Track Championships.
Oh, right. I was wondering how that turned out.
Yeah. USC grad Dalilah Muhammad set the world record. Also, Allison Felix, greatest track athlete in world history.
I know
made
that
another world championship team 8 months after having her daughter.
And that was what is that on ESPN, or how do you follow this?
It's on NBC Sports Gold. I'm a big fan.
Well, PF post Franmil is what I'm dealing with.
Yeah.
Gonna miss that guy, Franmil Reyes. If you listen to our show explaining the Padres at the beginning of the year, you might have heard me say that he was the guy I loved the most, was most excited about it. Now they've shipped him off to Cleveland, the land of Cleves, and
they have chili on spaghetti. Or no, that's Cincinnati.
I don't know.
It's all a mystery to me.
I texted my wife a picture of Franmil holding a puppy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just...
That's rough.
It's rough. I talked about it on the Kept Faith this week, so you can get my full download on that if you're on the edge of your seat for sports punditry from Scott Lewis. Coming up on the show today, the president of the San Diego City Council, Georgette Gómez, came into the studio to talk about her big week, a week that is not over.
That's right. Just not.
She had a little bit of a warning for the mayor. She kind of sat in here and laid it down.
Okay.
It's weird being in this job now for a while. Like, I watch these people kind of progress in their careers, grow up a little bit. And she is a business lady now.
She's big time.
She sat in. She's you can tell the weight of the various jobs she has is on her, but she's managing. It's quite a rise to have watched her career grow, and an interesting moment to check in with her. So stay tuned for that. Also, last year, voters directed the city of San Diego to sell Mission Valley land to San Diego State University. You might remember that.
Vaguely.
They hoped the deal would be done this summer, but it won't be. So reporter Ry Rivard is coming in to talk about it. He did a great story this week, catching up on everything we know and don't know. That was a good story, right?
Yeah, I learned a lot about why we don't know certain things.
It's nice when you tell a reporter, like, just tell us what you know about this. And he did a great job. And finally, the San Diego Unified School District's board president had a message for the superintendent. The San Diego Unified School Board voted to extend Superintendent Cindy Martin's contract through 2023. Not necessarily that big of a deal. She's been around. That would make her a really long tenure, really. I mean, it's 10 years.
Yeah. But,
kind of expected. They obviously like her. But there was something unexpected about it. You don't often see this. In an unusual rebuke of Martin, the president of the board, who is Sharon Whitehurst Payne, voted against the contract extension. You never see board members stand out as against their executive director on their own, usually.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really long time. I'm not sure if I can recall any instance in which a board member was publicly critical of Cindy Martin in a way like this, and especially with a vote like this where, it's not the decisive vote in any way. So she's really putting herself out there as like being opposed to this move.
Yeah. And usually you want to, if you're going to stand against an executive on any kind of board, you usually want to get a majority with you Otherwise, you could face some consequences or whatever. So obviously, that's just to highlight how big of a deal what she did was. She's also the president of the board. And she said that her reason for doing this was kind of twofold. One, she said, look, we have enough years. She's still going to be here a couple more years, so we can extend it in the future if we want to. There doesn't seem to be any reason. But then she said, really, her reason was Lincoln High School.
Getting Lincoln High School right has to be the district's number one priority, not with all the stops and starts and so forth. We have not put together a comprehensive, coordinated picture for Lincoln High School because those students are indicative of other kids in the district who are not achieving. Lincoln is...
Okay, we've talked a lot about Lincoln, obviously, over the years on this show and on Good Schools for All. Lincoln has persistently struggled with safety, academics, enrollment, and that's despite that new campus, beautiful campus built in 2007, $129 million. The dropout rate there is 3 times as high as the district's overall. The chronic absenteeism rate is double the district average. Last month, the district abruptly fired its relatively new principal. It's the 5th principal in 12 years. It's just rough. And I think what makes it even more rough is they have said this before, that Lincoln has to get right. We have to make it right.
Yeah, Martin herself has said that. And I think that last point that you mentioned, that, they're going on their 6th leader in 12 years, I think, including interim leaders that they had to bring in to kind of fill gaps, is sort of helping to drive a lot of the other problems, which is interesting given Martin's own background as a principal. And, presumably she understands how important it is to have a strong and stable leader kind of driving a lot of that change. That's not to say she's, ignored the school, because I think she's really made it a point to actually be there on campus a lot more often. And she's talked about it, but, they're just not seeing the results.
I think this is, they talked a lot about when they talked about the extension of her contract, about how well the school district did on some of those national assessments. And there are indications that it is progressing better than some of the other school districts. But, it's in this area, in serving the least, the most vulnerable kids out there, that you really have to hold them accountable. I mean, it's like, there are good schools in the school districts, there's no doubt. Like, it's the question is everybody getting those same opportunities? And I think if any one of these problems was happening in any part of the rest of the city, it would be madness. They would burn the place down. They would be so mad, and there'd be so much attention, and there would be nothing else getting done until that was taken care of. And that this problem just continues to fester and go and go and go. And I think that's what Whitehurst was talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, just to highlight that point, so in 2016, just to really emphasize like how much they've tried to get this right, Martin opened the school year. The school year started, and she said in her opening remarks at their first school board meeting in September 2016 that there was a lot to look forward to. In particular, one thing.
Because there's one school in particular where I think we can really expect great things to happen this year, and that's Lincoln High School. I would like to ask...
I think if you remember at the time, those comments were really controversial, because I think a lot of people in that community saw them as a little tone deaf, in the sense that, they were experiencing a lot of really big problems at the campus. And so, I think she was trying to acknowledge the school in a way, but I think that the comments she made kind of made it sound to people like everything's great, everything's going to keep being great, a lot to look forward to.
Right. Well, there's no question. There's a lot of concern when you report about Lincoln that you're only highlighting the bad things and such. We've highlighted successful students that come out of there, but the numbers, the sense of insecurity that a lot of people have, we also can't ignore. And hopefully the district can make some progress on that, and maybe this is a wake-up call for that. Last year, voters directed the city of San Diego to sell 132 acres of land to San Diego State University. That was so that the school could expand the campus, build homes, hotels, and a new stadium and a river park.
Gotta have a river park.
That project is supposed to break ground early next year, but behind closed doors, there is tension. Okay, joining us right now with that is Ry Rivard. Ry, our environment reporter, how are you?
Good. How you doing?
Thanks for coming in. The city and university don't agree on what the land is worth. They're haggling over a new appraisal that they won't share with us. Why not?
They say it's in draft form.
The city has very little leverage here. If you remember, it's like selling your house, but you can only sell it to one person. And so that one person has a little bit of an advantage in how they haggle things. Ry Rivard did an update for us on everything we know about what's going on behind those closed doors, everything we don't know, which is a lot. What's going on?
So 8 months ago, as you said, voters said, hey, we want SDSU to get this Mission Valley site, the old Qualcomm Stadium site, the SDCCU site, as we now call it. And we want SDSU to have it. And there have just been not much publicly. They signed in March a kind of confidentiality agreement for these two negotiating teams, one from the city, one from the university. And we're starting to get close to several sort of key deadlines. We've already probably missed one of the university's key deadlines, which was to have some sort of preliminary agreement in hand this summer so that they could proceed with, hiring construction firms and engineering firms so that they could break ground early next year.
So they want to break ground, and they told you on the record that they're not worried about their break ground deadline being delayed right now, right?
Yeah, they've gone ahead. They've been hiring firms. They've hired Clark Construction, among other firms, to work on the stadium site once they own the land, but to sort of plan for the stadium site, plan for the development of the rest of the site too.
Right. And so talk about specifically what firms they've brought on. They brought Clark, you said, in on that. They've also hired a firm to run some of the sales, the early fundraising efforts.
Yeah, they have this company called Legends that'll help them finance the stadium. One of the things we reported last year is that the university just really hasn't been sure of how it's going to pay for all this stuff. Particularly the stadium, it seems like they know some combination of things that they hope will add up to the amount of money that they're hoping to spend on the stadium, but it doesn't sound like they have all of those different revenue sources in place. That's things like people who want to buy premium seats, a company or person who wants to have their name on the field or the stadium, donors who are interested in helping to, and concession folks that want to sell stuff at the stadium too.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really interested in this discovery that there's a confidentiality agreement in place, which helps explain why we don't know so much about it. Can you talk a little bit about what the city council's role is in all of this? And because so much of it is in secret, is there worry that by the time it gets to the council, there might be a deal in place that the council doesn't really agree with?
Yeah, that's something that Council President Georgette Gómez expressed some concern about in April when they had the sort of most public airing to date of what's going on with these negotiations. She said, we really want to stay updated because I really want this process to succeed, and I don't want there to be this deal that comes to us that we are suddenly not supportive of. So that is a concern. And the confidentiality, it's hard to explain where that comes from. Because there are a couple of overlapping things going on. The city attorney wrote the city council a letter and said there are only some very limited closed-door discussions that the city council can have. So there are now these negotiating teams that are having almost entirely closed-door discussions that, of course, the city council isn't part of. And the confidentiality agreement seems to cover the people involved in those discussions. And it does appear that there's this air that confidentiality agreement prevents those people from updating the city council, even though it explicitly says that they should be, or could be anyway.
Yeah, that's fascinating. All right, let's step back and understand exactly what we're dealing with here. The university, in order to build this whole thing, to prepare the land and to build the stadium, they need to come up with how much money, how many dollars?
biggest estimate we got was about $550 million.
Right.
That's the land, the stadium, and then site prep.
And after that, they could start recouping some of those costs as they build apartments, hotels, and other things on top of it, right?
Yeah, the whole project's going to be like $3.8 billion in different kinds of construction.
But to get that everything started, that's a big nut to get over at first, right? And so when we talk about how they're going to raise the money for all of that, that's where you come up with all these different ideas: the stadium naming rights, fundraising, all these types of things, which puts an intense pressure on what's happening right now. Because every dollar that the university has to pay to the city to secure this land is a dollar they cannot use to prepare the land to eventually make their money back on this such. And so they're going to be highly incentivized not to pay more than absolutely necessary to get this land from the city. And then on the city's side, the only motivation I can see for them to try to get as much money as possible from this is, well, A, to pay for things that the city has, its own debts, its own future needs. It's a valuable piece of land, but also then whatever political problem there might be in not getting a great deal back for the taxpayers on this. Now, that could be buttressed by got this big development done. That might be the only thing people care about. But am I reading all that right?
Yeah. The one thing two things to add is the university, some of the stuff that they want to build, they want as a discount against the sale price. So they're saying, hey, look, we want to demolish this stadium, the old stadium. That's going to cost something. We want to deduct that from the sale price that the city wants to charge the university. And
you found an actual number, I think the first time I've seen it, of what they estimate all the costs of demolition and preparing the land would be, right?
Yeah, it's in the $130 million range, but that's a couple of things. They redacted some portion of the document they shared with us. So that's demolition costs plus other site prep.
Why did they redact that?
For listeners who haven't been listening, we are in litigation with San Diego State University over documents that they wouldn't share with us last fall about how they plan to pay for this thing. So they have been very close to the vest for quite some time.
So the appraisal is in, right? It's just in draft form. Do you have any sense of when the public will know what it says?
Soonish.
Oh,
soonish.
Sure.
Yeah.
Help me understand where we're at with that litigation. So they had said to the public, you're not going to have to pay more taxes for this. And most importantly, for our constituents, the students won't have to pay increased fees for this. We said, how is that possible? And they said, we've done financial projections. We said, will you give us those financial projections? And they said no. But later, there was a revelation from one of the leaders of the SDSU where they were saying, no, and that's not the reason we know this. What did he say?
This was Tom McCarron, who's now the Senior Vice President for Mission Valley Development, a finance guy for the university. He said the reason we were able to say this, he and in combination with his lawyers in the different filings that the university's made recently, said essentially we made this promise that we wouldn't raise tuition or fees on students because we can't unilaterally, which is different from saying we don't need to pay for the project. And they have essentially
like a tautology. We won't because we won't.
Because we can't.
We don't have that authority.
But somebody does, and that's the CSU, the Cal State University Board of Trustees, plus students who have in the past been asked to vote for fee increases for athletic-related expenses. Actually, there's one other thing to circle back to the city's political calculus. I mean, there is this assumption, and I think a lot of people, particularly fans of the competing ballot measure last year, Soccer City, an assumption and an argument that the city needs to get fair market value for the land. And that is what the university promised to pay. But there were people on the university side, again, not speaking for the university, but speaking as boosters of the university, who said, look, if the city wants to do the right thing, they should just give us the land.
Yeah.
Because, it's a city asset, it's a taxpayer asset, but so is a university.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And I think if they were to be confident and bold about making that case, that would be interesting to listen to. I think that what I would want to make sure was part of that deal, which I'm not sure is a part of guaranteed deal making right now, which is that big river park that they've promised, the river adjacent park, it's actually not going to touch the river, correct?
You're not allowed. There's a lot of laws.
Okay,
environmental regulations.
The river adjacent park will need to get done, and I'm not sure it's guaranteed to get done. And so I think there's some things like that need to be like locked in no matter what they decide on the price, especially if the price is pretty weak.
I was just going to say river adjacent park sounds nice. They should put one next to the Intermodal Transit Center.
Yeah, it's a wrap.
Yeah.
A river adjacent park. Okay, so what's next? We're waiting for that appraisal and some announcements, I guess.
Yeah, there's supposed to be an environmental impact report sometime soon as well. And then, we've asked for more documents, obviously, and we're hoping that the city will provide them. And we're waiting to see if SDSU will be forced by a judge to provide the documents we asked for last year. And then, until they take something to the city council, the negotiating teams have promised that they're not going to say anything until they either have a deal or everything completely falls apart.
All right. On the other side of the break, I talk with City Council President Georgette Gómez about her very big week, and it's not over yet. We get into housing development, transit, the mayor's agenda, and of course, I had to get the question in about the upcoming mayor's race. You could kind of see where she was leaning, but she wasn't willing to say. We'll be right back.
Thanks for listening to this Voice of San Diego podcast. If you like what you hear and want more news like this, sign up for The Morning Report. That's our most popular newsletter. We send it out every weekday. Just visit voiceofsandiego.org and click on the newsletter tab. And thanks.
We are back. Here's my discussion with City Council President Georgette Gómez. We started off by talking about the biggest policy to come from the City Council's Democratic supermajority yet, affordable housing requirements for new homes, and they might not be set in stone yet.
Yeah, no, it has been a big week.
Yes,
Busy
it
week,
has.
for sure.
And it's not done.
No, it's not. I have
So-
another day today.
We're speaking on Thursday. There's still some things to go and talk about. Let's dive in. As you guys were building a supermajority for the San Diego City Council, the Democrats, we were all kind of wondering what that might produce. And it seems like the biggest policy so far has now made it through the City Council, and that's your proposal or your deal that you came up with to change the regulations around affordable housing requirements when builders build new homes.
Yes.
So right now, if you build a bunch of new homes, you have to set some of them aside for affordable housing. How many? 10?
10% at 50 AMI.
Right. And so your proposal was to leave it at 10%.
Yes.
However, to increase the fee if you don't build those.
Correct.
And that was from about $12 to $18?
It's about 12. It actually used to be 7-ish. It just got updated to 12. It's been fluctuating. We never knew exactly how that formula was. So one of the things that we did aside from increasing it was actually create a formula that everybody understood, or at least the builders and Housing Commission understood. So there's more stability.
That's per what?
Square foot.
Right. Okay. And so the increase to that. And then it also said that if you're going to build the homes, they need to be set aside for a new market.
Yes.
And that market is for lower income.
It's lower income focus. Yes. Well, let's start with the district that I represent.
Sure.
I represent District 9. The average income for my district is $38,000 for a family of 4, right? But I also get that not only am I representing my district, but I'm looking at this from a citywide. So there's 2 issues that we have in our city. One is we're not building for the very low, and we're not building for the moderate. And we constantly talk about the middle, the missing middle, right? So those 2 areas that are pretty significant have been, over time, been ignored. what I've been focusing on, being that I represent District 9, 38,000 for a family of 4, very, very low. That's the area that I've been focusing, hoping that others are going to be focusing on the middle income. And they have. A lot of our colleagues constantly talk about the missing middle. I need to talk about putting also emphasis on the very low, which is what I did in this update.
The point being that if you're going to build affordable housing units, you're saying to yourself, why am I going to require that if they don't even serve the folks that I represent?
Right, exactly. So in the world of affordable housing, I mean, if you talk to any affordable housing developer, they make reference to this lasagna layer of economics, right? And meaning that in order for them to bring a project forward, they have so many different programs that they put together to basically make it whole and develop it, right? Inclusionary, or the in lieu fee that we have, is part of that lasagna, right? Okay. There is state funding, there's federal funding, and a lot of those different programs target different AMIs.
So let's make sure people are following along. What we're talking about is
very complicated.
Yeah, we're talking about area median income. So this is the if you say 50%, if you have an area median income of $100,000, 50% of that would be 50.
Correct.
And so what you're saying is that you wanted to lower, if you want to get one of these homes, you're going to have an income that is very low.
Correct.
And that's set aside. And what you're clarifying just now is that that's just one part.
That's just one part of the formula of making affordable housing projects work.
Right. Now, there was a consideration you had to maybe actually just forcing them to build these units as opposed to letting them pay the fee.
That was part of the conversation, yeah.
And you abandoned that because you felt you were compelled by their arguments that would be too much of a burden?
I was compelled by the affordable housing developers. So we have two different types of developers in town, right? We have the market rate developers, and then we have the affordable housing developers. The market rate developers basically have, for the most part, if you look at the history of inclusionary since it started in 2003, but then it got sued, and that's when this whole conversation started with Tony Atkins. It was just built on site. It got sued, and inclusionary came, right? The in lieu fee, in lieu fee. So then, ever since then, if we look at the trajectory of inclusionary housing, for the most part, developers have been choosing to pay because in theory, it's kind of cheaper for them to do that. So it's been easier for them to go on that path. So our inclusionary ordinance really was you pay a fee.
Yeah.
It wasn't develop.
Right.
So I was trying to change that. I could have done it with get rid of the in lieu fee.
Right.
That was pretty much straightforward, right? But I was also pretty compelled by the affordable housing developers who actually tap into this fund to be able to bring state money to the local. So yeah. I'm trying to create a balance here in terms of, for the big projects, if it makes sense to build on site, then they're going to do that, right? But then for those projects that it might be smaller or they might not want to do it, there's still that option. But they're going to think about it more.
Yeah, okay. So that was the point, is to make it a little bit harder decision to pay the fee as opposed to building it on site.
Correct.
Okay. There was substantial, you talked for months and months with the builders about this.
Practically a year.
Okay. And there was still substantial concern as it headed towards the city council decision. And the builders in particular seemed to they wanted a lower fee.
Correct.
And then they also wanted to make sure that when they had to build affordable units, that they could market those to higher income folks. And I guess I don't understand why, A, they were so passionate about that, and why, B, you were so passionate about not letting that happen.
Yeah.
So help me understand, why is that such a big deal?
Let me tell you what occurred. Almost a year I've been in these conversations with a lot of stakeholders. The BIA was part of that, right? So the final product that got introduced to rules, there were maybe 3 to 4 different drafts that got us to introducing it to rules. From rules committee, so that means some changes occurred, right? And then in the spirit of wanting to make this move forward, I was trying to compromise. So it came to rules. Literally, I kid you not, maybe 30 minutes or maybe an hour walking into rules. The industry was in my office and saying, hey, if you just do these things, we'll be there, right? And part of those things was ensure that, because this is going to be a phase-in process, we're not going to start date as soon as it gets implemented. I gave 3 years, and always from the beginning, my understanding the 3 years was going to be 3 years. I didn't catch it when it got put on paper that in theory was 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So they flagged it, and I agreed. I'm like, you will get 3 years, so I will fix it. And then they wanted other things, and I just couldn't do it. I'm like, look, we've been at the table for a while already. I've been already compromising. I need to move the conversation with my colleagues to try to land somewhere. We need to stop this, right? So I introduced it to rules. It got changed somewhat. And I started with the fee of $25. What got out was $22. That was yet another compromise. So we're in version already number 5.
Yeah.
It gets to council, and I changed a little bit. I gave the 3 years, and then the whole idea of which projects are going to get impacted. Everybody had different understanding. I landed in a this is what it will be, and this is how we're going to define it. I worked it out with DSD, the department that oversees permitting, so everybody understands
as far
that
as
they were
existing projects,
right.
like would they be impacted? And you said you let those go through.
Right, we defined it
Yeah.
in terms of this is the marker, right? And they were comfortable with that. We love it, and we love that we
You're
actually
saying the
have.
builders told you they were fine
yes,
with
they
that.
were fine with the definition. They were fine with the 3 years, because in fact it's a little bit than 3 years. It's 3 years and 4 months or something like that. So I even gave them even a little bit more in terms of the phase-in, right? But then there were 2 issues. Like, we only have 2 issues out of the 6. There were 7. I think there were some 7 issues that were presented to the planning commission, I think, in terms of that list that they submitted. But out of that, they were like, there's 2. The fee to 18, and increase the AMI, the area income, medium income, to 60. And at that point, I just can't do it. I mean, compromise means you give and I give. I've been giving. I'm like, what are you guys going to give here? You're just asking for more and more and more. And the conversation, it just got to a point where it's just like, this is never going to stop. It's just, there's going to be 2 more things. And I just couldn't do it anymore. And the reason that I was very passionate was because I just felt like I've been pretty transparent. I've been changing it quite significantly since I started to what got presented to city council. And I was trying to accommodate, but there was just, I just felt that the more I give, the more issues that were going to be presented. And I just felt like enough.
Okay. So it goes forward.
Mm-hmm.
You have 5 votes. It passes.
Yes.
But you didn't have a 6th vote.
Yeah.
So Vivian Moreno, your colleague and ally on the city council, represents south of 8 communities, Barrio Logan Heights, a lot of places you know really well.
Yes.
And she said this in her quote. She said, quote, placing economically infeasible regulations within the city's inclusionary housing ordinance on the affordable housing developers who are on the ground building the units was not something I could support. Do you have a reaction to that?
I mean, I was pretty disappointed, because I think, and we had a conversation, and she said, these are some of the issues that I have, and the AMI was one of those. And I just told her, look, I can give you a developer that would say something different. And there were some developers that were in the hearing supporting the ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
So it's we can have this philosophical conversation, and this is how she felt. She wanted to, she chose to carry the BIA's agenda. That's on her. I have a clear conscience. I'm representing my district. District 8 gets impacted in terms of not having enough affordable housing. I can only say that this is a good policy, that it is economically feasible. I mean, a lot, aside from the conversations that we had with developers, advocates, we also had an economist who did the analysis. The same day that we're looking at this ordinance, we were approving a couple of projects. Some of those projects were 50% AMI projects. So to say that it's not feasible, but yet we just approve a project, I question it.
So let's highlight your point you're making. So the rule you want is that these units will be at 50% the area median income if they're set aside for affordable housing.
For inclusionary.
For inclusionary.
Yes.
If you're building them
for
on
the
site.
city of San Diego's inclusionary ordinance.
And these builders are saying it's unfeasible. It's not feasible to do that. So we need it at 60%. And okay, so this transitions now to a political question. So if this goes this goes to the mayor's office, he has an option now to veto it.
Correct.
And if she stands with that point, then you guys can't override that veto.
Correct.
Is that are you going to work out a deal? Can you work out a deal with her before that happens?
I just feel that the only deal, and it's not just her. I mean, if you heard Mark Kersey,
Sure.
As well, I think he was implying if you just do these two things for him, where it was the AMI to 60, and as well as lowering the fee, he carried both of those issues. I could do that. I'm not sure if I want to go there, because I honestly do believe that I worked significantly to get to something that I just felt that it was good, and this is a good policy. If the mayor is to veto it, then that's a different conversation that we will have. Yeah.
That brings up other political considerations. He has a lot of priorities of his own.
Yes.
A coalition that's ongoing, trying to pass a convention center, a hotel tax increase that would fund also the convention center expansion, but also some affordable housing and homeless services issues and roads. Is that something you would feel would be in jeopardy were he to veto something like this? Well,
I can tell you that inclusionary housing is probably for this year is the biggest thing that I'm doing. And everybody in council, everybody, as the mayor knows, they know that. So I feel that I've approached this conversation and I managed this conversation in a very transparent, honest way. And I've tried working with the industry, the building industry. And I also have the people that I represent. Once again, I'm going to go back to that 38,000 for a family of 4 means that we need more of that type of housing because they're not finding housing. So that impacts people. So I'm trying to balance this influence of a policy that is going to deliver something to the people, and also try to figure out a way that I'm working with the developers that yet I do not want to kill the industry, which they're framing it as this is going to kill the industry. And
actually have that ancillary consequence of creating fewer units, even
correct,
though more are required.
Which is right, exactly. And so I knew, if in my heart I knew that this update was going to do that, I wouldn't do that.
So you have to decide if they're bluffing about that and will continue to build, and you can call them on that bluff and require more, or if you literally will hurt their ability to build.
And if I were to do that, if I see that, I'll be the first one to say, hey, let's reconsider inclusionary.
Okay. Fascinating.
So I do not want to ignore your question, though. That was not the question.
Right.
The question was about the projects that the agenda that the mayor has. I've been a good ally. And he's been a good ally. He's been very supportive of the work that I've been doing around transit, and I'm appreciative of that. But this is important. So if this were to go down, I would engage differently.
An interesting political moment. There's always something in the summer in city politics.
I know, right?
Every summer,
before we go out. Yes.
Every summer.
There's something about that, yes.
Let's move to a different topic. You told us a couple weeks ago that your highest priority is actually this transit issue. You're the chairwoman of the Metropolitan Transit System. You want to raise the sales tax. It's called not enhance SD. It's
Elevate
SD.
Elevate.
Yes.
We're elevating San Diego.
I'm high.
There you
There you
go. Love it.
So the tax increase would be sales tax increase, and it would. You've been doing some research with your community about how it would do it, and we found that somewhat fascinating. The community wants more buses more often. They don't care about congestion relief.
Frequency is really important.
The people who use transit want it to work better for them. Okay, but you're also going to have to balance some other questions out there. One of the things I wanted to ask you first about is we had Mary Salas on our live podcast a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, and she's the mayor of Chula Vista, and she said. We asked her about this. Chula Vista has already raised their tax a couple of times recently for their own fiscal issues in Chula Vista. And she said it would be difficult for the public to accept in Chula Vista this sales tax increase after they've already done it a couple of times. She didn't say she would oppose it, but she's kind of clearly trying to find her footing on this issue or sympathize with people who would be frustrated with the tax increase. Yeah. If you don't have Chula Vista, this is not going to win. Correct. So how are you going to overcome that?
Well, so the things that we've been doing since I started this whole process of Elevate SD, I created an ad hoc committee within the board last year. And then the outcome of that was, okay, let's start putting some money to start a process. So Elevate came from the ad hoc committee. The first thing that we did this preliminary poll. And I was actually pretty surprised to get the report back. But 70% of the folks that we polled, voters throughout our region, Chula Vista included, are supportive of doing a transit tax, a tax for transit. So I was really, I was extremely happy when I heard that. The follow-up of that was we also did some focus groups. And yet again, the report back was practically the same outcome. 7 out of the 10 that were participating, and there were several groups that we gathered together, had the same outcome in terms of we were willing to give money if our transit system would improve. And improvement meant a couple of things: more frequency, expansion to areas that are not there. Have it go to jobs is also a major one. The other piece that I find really interesting is folks are okay creating better opportunities for low-income people, which is interesting to see. I was surprised. I want to believe that we all have a good, kind heart, but sometimes the realities are a bit different. But to have seen that and people are supportive of that, that was pretty, actually, there was some hope, which I thought it was great. Now, some of the reporting that we got from that poll from the South Bay was pretty supportive of this measure. And so now let's fast forward to the now. What are we doing? We've been actually going to the communities. We've been working with the business industries. We're talking to the educational institutions, and there is appetite. The South Bay for MTS is one of our biggest geographical areas that we serve on transit, and so there's support. If we look at Measure A, the areas that it did good were South Bay.
Measure A was the sales tax increase for Sandag.
Yes.
And that failed, but it did get a majority, and largely because of South Bay.
Correct. So actually the whole jurisdiction, with the exception of Poway and a little bit of East County, the rest of the areas, it passed.
You're talking about jurisdiction there because MTS does not cover the entire county of San Diego.
That is correct.
And that was part of the argument, is that why bother why bother those folks in the North County or whatever that may not be supportive of transit because they're not affected by the same system?
Correct.
To ask them to support a tax when it won't, when you want to focus it on the transit system within those areas.
Right. So actually, before Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez introduced AB 805, the MTS board, and actually that was, I believe it was either my first or second board meeting, there were discussions of our lobbyists, because MTS does have a lobbyist, to start looking at the possibilities of seeking a tax measure just for transit. So we were already starting those conversations. Let's figure out how we can do that and do that work. Soon after, Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher introduces AB 805, and part of that was giving the authority for transit agencies to seek that measure. So it worked out great. So it's perfect. So it came from all of that as well.
Hard to picture a more impactful local legislation lately. That has really
AB
changed.
805 changed a lot of discussions at the local level.
Okay, I have a couple things we need to get through.
Yeah.
One, the mayor and the head of Sandag, Hassan Akrada, have been very excited about this Grand Central San Diego sort of hub for all transit and airport connections in the Old Town area. They announced that they have a potential to make a deal with the Navy. But some folks on the left who are very supportive of transit think that this might be a distraction, if not a boondoggle, or itself sucking up too much energy or money. Is that where are you on evaluating that?
Yeah, I would say that I'm practical in relation to transit. I want to just see a good system in our region. I really do, and I think we have a long way to go. Related to this conversation, though, to go back to the poll we did, transit to the airport literally was the highest project that people wanted to see happen. So that actually influenced. There's a lot of support from that for that particular connection to occur. The question is the how. So we're actually looking at expanding the trolley into the airport. And my vision that I have, if we were to do that, is, okay, if we can do that, make it work, could we also eventually in the future, or even part of this discussion of Elevate SD, is could we go into OB or Pacific Beach in that whole area, right? Because it's perfect from that sense. So I have two objectives here. One is let's figure out how we can do it to the airport, and then the other is, okay, from there, where does it go? I don't just want it to loop. That's the way that people have been framing it, is it loops, it goes into the circular thing, right? I feel like we need to think even bigger, just because the beaches are extremely popular. There's a lot of congestion. We're talking about doing more density. But if we don't really have the alternative way in which people are moving, I think the way that it could be this expansion of the trolley. So I'm looking at it from that lens as well.
So you're saying maybe not this Grand Central Station. You're not saying you're against that necessarily.
I'm not against it. I think it's a great idea. It would be a great landmark for us. But at the end of the day, it's going to require a lot of work. This is not we're going to break ground next year or 5 years. If we can make it happen, we're talking about maybe in the good year, maybe 10 years, right?
Yeah.
We can't wait that long, because this is, I mean, if we really think about the location, there's a couple of things that I've said. This is why my hesitation. I'm supportive. I'm willing to go through it. But there's no tracks that go there. So we have to move all the tracks. That's a lot of work, right? They're talking about housing and businesses and the transit hub and all of that, right? Housing, I'm assuming this is a contaminated area. Mm-hmm. Then we're talking about cleanup, and probably a significant amount of cleanup. That's going to take a lot of work too. I'm used to developing and helping developers acquire land and land that is contaminated, but that takes a lot of resources and time. So that might be 5 years.
Yeah, if you're going to clean everything up and move tracks, well, moving tracks, even if it's only 20 feet, is just as hard as moving them
it's pretty
couple
significant.
miles, yeah.
Oh yes, it's pretty. There's a lot in the mix, and they're talking about, Hassan is talking about possibly doing something underground. Good, but we're talking about undergrounding under military and under the airport. That's a lot of hurdles to cross, right? And none of it. I mean, I am a believer that the biggest thing that I've learned, and since I became a council member, is that truly, when there's political will, there is a way. There is a way, right? But it's gonna take a lot of time to get there. And I think if we can get there, it's gonna be a great thing for San Diego. It will be, and it's worth pushing. It's worth having Hassan say this is worth it. And let's figure out the how. And I'm all about that. But in the middle, within all of that, we can do things now.
Fascinating. All right, one last thing. We are not that far away from a primary election for mayor. Have you picked a side? Do you have a candidate that you prefer in this race, or are you still doing interviews?
I'm staying out of it. I don't know if at any point if I'm going to be supporting anyone. I'm in an interesting spot because one of my colleagues is one of the candidates.
Sure.
A good friend is another a good friend, a good ally. Is also a candidate. So I'm just going to, at this moment, I don't have a side.
Fascinating. Council President Georgette Gómez has a lot on her plate. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Voice of San Diego podcast. It's the most popular political affairs podcast recorded in downtown San Diego, at least this part of downtown. If you like the show, don't forget to subscribe and please share it with your friends. We want to make sure everyone who cares about San Diego news hears the show. Send them to vosd.org/pod. I'm Scott Lewis, editor-in-chief. Ry Rivard is our environment reporter. Sara Libby is managing editor. This show was produced by Nate John, Adriana Helvis, Megan Wood. We will talk to you next week.